Hi, I'm Catherine, and I'm gonna go low tech on this video, but I'm going to tell you today about long-term language learners that are also called, the abbreviation is LTELs. So I'm just gonna go through my slides for my PowerPoint here. Who are LTELs? LTEL is a long-term language learner. It's a student who has gone to school in the United States for 6 or more years without reclassification as English proficient. Although some schools do have effective programs for teaching English language learners, the programs are usually designed for newcomers or immigrants who have recently immigrated to the United States, not LTELs. So most LTELs were born in the U.S. The vast majority have been here since kindergarten. A lot of these students also experience knowledge gaps in their formal education due to traveling back and forth between their home country and the United States. We also see knowledge gaps due to transience, where families have socioeconomic issues, economic issues, and so they have to move around a lot, and the kids end up changing schools. And so these LTELs spend a lot of time in readjustment, readjusting to a new school, to a new teacher, etc. While they're socially literate in English and their home language, they are stuck in an intermediate stage of literacy, lacking the precise vocabulary, syntax, and grammar of a native speaker. There is no nationwide data on the number of LTEL students. However, regional data from New York City, Chicago, Colorado, and California indicate that the percentage of LTEL students among the secondary EL population in those areas range from 23 to 74% in 2013-14, and that percentage is increasing. And here, I don't know if you can see that, but here's a map of, this is the percentage of public school students who were English language learners by state for the school year 2014-15. And just to look at a few of these states, California 22.4, Colorado 11.7, Kansas 9.5, Missouri 3.0. And there are approximately 4.7 million English language learners enrolled in U.S. K through 12 schools. That's 10% of the student population, and that's over a 60% increase in the last decade. So if we figure 25 to 75% of these students, these secondary students, turn into LTELs, that's a pretty significant number of students. What are the characteristics of an LTEL? They read and write below grade level. They're functional in their first language and in English, but language usage is imprecise and lacks the verbal syntax and grammar of a native speaker. They're often invisible and non-participants in class discussions because they don't have the vocabulary to participate. They struggle with reading textbooks and long written passages and have difficulty with vocabulary. Their writing skills are emerging, but they never seem to improve. They approach writing like it's the written form of their oral language. They're often referred for remedial classes, although that's not an appropriate placement for them because students with learning disabilities have a different set of academic issues. The majority of LTELs want to pursue higher education, but they don't realize that their academic record and courses aren't adequately preparing them for post-secondary learning. Usually around the 5th grade, students start to disengage, and LTEL will start to disengage because of after years of frustration and boredom. They are often, they're desperate, and so they disengage. Many of these students end up dropping out of school. The 4-year graduation rate for an LTEL is 49%. The highest dropout rate and lowest levels of English proficiency is seen in LTELs who are placed in mainstream classes. All right. This is just a little graphic that I filled in here, but in LTEL, they are trapped in a cycle of intermediate literacy. They're not neither language. For example, if we're talking about a Spanish speaker, Spanish isn't dominant, English isn't dominant. They're trapped in a state of intermediate bilingualism, lacking academic English, literacy proficiency necessary for learning achievement, and then the inability to participate and absorb increasingly complex content while falling further and further behind their peers. And this leads to boredom, invisibility, and disengagement, and it just goes around and round until they finally end up dropping out. How the education system is underserving the needs of LTELs. Teachers of long-term English learners often have low expectations for their students' achievement. LTELs are put into classrooms with the least experienced teachers who often have limited materials. The sink or swim method, this is what immigrants historically, when we hear people say, well, I was just put in a school and I turned out fine. And it's called the sink or swim method. You're just thrown into a mainstream class and without any support, and whatever happens, happens. Some LTELs are assigned to reading intervention programs due to poor performance on standardized tests. Again, that's not an appropriate placement for them. Bilingualism is seen as a deficit that must be extinguished. LTELs have a lack of access to elective classes and rigorous grade level content classes, such as advanced placement. Some of them are placed with newcomer ELLs, which severely limits their access to appropriate level of instruction. For those with an actual learning disability, special education placement is often way delayed. And the disjointed nature of the pull-out curriculum that is typical of an ESL program, where a student will be in the mainstream class for part of the day and in the ESL class the rest of the day. It's very disruptive to the continuity of instruction for these students. Okay. And so what can you do to accommodate, what can you as a teacher do to accommodate long-term English learners? Code Red. By the time a student is labeled as an LTEL, they have been floundering in language no man's land for at least 6 years. This should set off alarm bells. Teachers must treat this situation with a sense of urgency. Whether or not your state, district, or school administrators realize the gravity of the situation, it is up to the teacher to consciously advance the student's language proficiency. So what are the different things that you can do? You can ask your administrator to identify who the English learners are in your class. Look at their English proficiency levels, and also identify who the long-term English learners are. Know whether the LTELs are enrolled in your class, and having access to their assessments will enable you to pinpoint specific gaps in language development and academic skills your students need to fill. It's time to end the ESL ghetto and encourage LTELs to integrate with mainstream students. Second language learners can be isolated in mainstream classrooms too, so try to create an inclusive learning environment where everyone's opinion is valued. In group work, devise incentives for all students to participate in discussions. For LTELs, this means previewing readings with them, providing talking points, front-loading vocabulary knowledge, finding online pictures, videos, definitions, and synonyms and cognates in their native language that will help them improve their content reading comprehension. Get to know your LTELs on a personal level and solicit their input as you create an action plan to make up academic ground. They need to know their current educational status, where they need to go, and how they are going to get there. Look at your LTELs as a distinct category of student. They can't be grouped with struggling readers because they have their own specific language needs. Try to find opportunities for your LTELs to advance their study of their native language by allowing them to write or choose reading materials in that language. Also, for some group work, allow students to converse in their native language to support oral literacy development. Make sure that you have daily plans for what you want the LTELs to learn that day. Verbalize and post the content and language objectives. LTELs often do not understand that what they are expected to do in class. Help them by giving clear verbal instructions and information, bolstered by written directions and visuals. Effective strategies include providing models of finished projects, rubrics that clarify the elements of successful work, and providing a step-by-step model for what you want them to do. Typically, LTELs have received a watered-down version of education that you don't find in mainstream, that's kind of specific to an ESL format. And instead of like reading whole textbooks, they're going to read excerpts. They do not have the experience of reading whole books or wonderful and expressive language. Pay attention to the quality of the texts assigned and commit to exposing LTEL students to powerful literature. Have LTELs write about what they read, prefacing the writing by talking through their thoughts. Writing assignments should cover a range of types of writing, summarizing justification, argument, opinion, and research. Always have students identify main ideas and details in their reading and capture that information in Cornell notes and writing summaries. Most effective classrooms for LTELs establish an environment that affirms language and culture and invites students to make connections between their life experiences and the academic content, that incorporates relevant issues and material into the curriculum and maintains high expectations and intellectual rigor. Even though teachers are trained to be subjective, this is like probably one of the most important points. Even though teachers are trained to be subjective, they don't realize how their negative perceptions of a student's potential can affect that student's learning. You must be aware of your interactions with and expectations for all students. ESL and content teachers must work as a team. LTELs have suffered literally for years from disjointed curriculum. In order to rectify this, ESL teachers should review material that content teachers cover in their classes. Conversely, content teachers should support reading and writing for LTELs in their classrooms. Redundancy is the key. And finally, focus on oral language development. It's important for the student to work on developing their native language. A lot of LTELs have plateaued in their native language and in English, so it's a good idea to allow them to go back and start working on their oral proficiency in their native language. Allow LTELs to work with students who have, in regard to LTELs learning English, allow them to work with students who have better English proficiency. Provide LTELs with several English and native language versions of the same content. Engage LTELs in choral reading and retelling, and ask them to write. Make sure that group work time is structured and effective by providing routine, discussion questions, and rubrics, and making sure that every student contributes to the discussion. Teach active listening by requiring the students to complete guided notes, cloze activities, or finding the gist. And demonstrate the use of academic language by doing a think aloud, referencing pictures, and using sign language to ensure vocabulary comprehension. Thank you for listening. That is my presentation on long-term English learners. Thanks.